So we are in Daniel chapter 11 tonight, and boy, I'm going to tell you, I've been pouring through um, sermon notes and historical documents and Bible references and the whole nine. It's been a very interesting week. Learned a lot. Hey, Gerald. Hey, Jim. But there's a lot of information in here tonight, and I created a spreadsheet. It's 3 pages worth that goes through verse by verse what the prophecy was, which king we're talking about at that time, about what the time frames were that event actually took place. So I'm going to make that available to people who want it. There's a lot of information. But before we start in Daniel 11, we need to go back a couple of verses in Daniel 10 because, the Bible wasn't written in chapters and verses. People after the fact came in and put the chapter verse markings in it. It's kind of like the old Bugs Bunny movie where he's running across the state lines and you can see the lines on the pavement. Those weren't there. The person speaking at the beginning of chapter 11 is the angel that's giving this prophecy to Daniel. So he starts speaking in verse 20 of chapter 10. So I'm not going to read the whole chapter. Fear not, we would be here forever. But I do want to read the first few verses before we jump into the north and the south thing. So starting in chapter 10, verse 20. Then he said, he being the angel that's giving this prophecy to Daniel, "Do you know why I have come to you? And now I must return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I have gone forth, indeed, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is noted in the scripture of truth. No one upholds me against these except Michael, your prince." Now, Michael is the prince, archangel in charge of protecting Israel. So this is still the angel speaking. "Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, I, even I, the angel, stood up to confirm and strengthen him." So that's a reminder again that there are angels watching over not only people, but nations. Verse 2, "And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others besides these." So here's the groundwork for this. Again, this is a chapter chock full of prophecies. They were all in the future for Daniel, but for us, some of them are now in the past. So we actually get a front row seat to seeing how some of these amazing prophecies were actually fulfilled by going back and looking at historical references. And I referenced Britannica.com as one of them, completely secular, but they give you the timelines and the names of the kings and the things that happened, and they map like this with these prophecies, and it is amazing. The 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the fourth will be rich. The fourth king that arose in Persia is one that, if you were with us when we studied the book of Esther, that was good old King Xerxes. And King Xerxes is the one whom Esther married. So King Xerxes is that fourth king in Persia. And he actually is the one documented in history that goes and gives Greece grief. So Xerxes actually tries to go and conquer Greece. He's not successful, but he stirs things up in Greece. And so that's the first prophecy fulfilled. That fourth king of Persia goes and stirs up Greece. Ka-ching, check one. "Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will." And we've already talked about in previous, I think Daniel chapter 7, when we studied that great king, and the angel says, the king of Greece will come, that was Alexander the Great. And he was an amazing and very powerful ruler. He came out of nowhere, a very young man. He ruled, he conquered almost the entire known world at the time. He was an amazing leader. People wanted to follow him. So that's Alexander the Great. He has arisen, then his kingdom will be broken up. Well, why was it broken up? It was broken up because he died. He was a very young man when he died. He was 32, 33 years old. And when he died, his wife was pregnant with their child, so he had no heirs. So when he died, these 4 generals decided, forget that, we're going to take over. They killed Alexander's wife, his whole family, his son. So there was no one left to reign but these 4 generals. And they are Lysimachus, who took Thrace and a lot of Asia Minor, Cassander, who controlled Macedonia and Greece, Ptolemy the First, who ruled Egypt, and then Seleucus, who ruled Syria and the parts north. So when we move forward into the rest of these prophecies, the king of the north in this first portion of this passage is Seleucus. Throughout this entire realm of talking about the king of the north and the king of the south, the king of the north is always Syria and the extended Syrian empire. I posted a map in our group earlier today. I hope you had a chance to look at that. If not, please go back and look at it, because it will show you where this king of the north, the Seleucid Empire, existed, and where the king of the south, which is the Egyptian area where Ptolemy reigned, existed. And when you look at that map, you will see that Israel is kind of like right in between there, sandwiched in between these two kingdoms. So whichever one of these two kingdoms ruled and was the most powerful during whatever period of history, Israel came under their rule. And then the other guy would win and they would take Israel. Then these guys would win and they would take Israel. And it just went back and forth like a ping pong match, or probably more likely like a tug of war. And Israel was stuck in the middle. So those are the only two kingdoms that we really care about. This prophecy is given to Daniel for his people, and his people are the Jews, right? So we got the Jews are in the middle, the monkey in the middle between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire, Syria, Egypt, in today's terminology. So we know who these kings are. So here's a little bit of background. Ptolemy the First, who was the king of the south, he had a prince named Seleucus who rose to power and took over Syria. So he stemmed from Ptolemy. So there was a relationship there because he was one of the princes in the Ptolemaic kingdom. So once Seleucus, I don't know how to pronounce that, rose to power, he took dominion over the Syrian region. He became more powerful than his former Egyptian ruler, meaning Ptolemy the First. Verse 5, the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, Kaching, Ptolemy, and his prince Seleucid, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion, meaning the prince. And his dominion shall be a great dominion. So now you've got these two kingdoms, the north and the south, Israel stuck in the middle with you, and they fought for 130 years or more. And whoever was strongest at one point in time, they're the ones who controlled the Holy Land. We're only in verse 5, and how many prophecies have we already seen fulfilled? 4 or 5? Somebody keep track? It's crazy. So in verse 6, at the end of some years, they'll join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north to make an agreement. This was a very common thing, even in many European countries. The king of the south, in this case, he sends his daughter, Bernice. Now we're up to Ptolemy II. So Bernice, who was the daughter of the Ptolemaic king II, was being given to the king of the north in an attempt to create an alliance between these two kingdoms. It happened a lot. You're already enemies, you might as well be family, right? Ha ha. But there was a problem, because the king of the north was already married. His wife, I'm going to butcher her pronouncing, Laodicea, like Laodicea. His wife, he wanted this exchange of power as well. So he put his wife aside. He basically divorced her. She was not happy, mind you, but he divorced her and he married the daughter of the king of the south. So that's what they're talking about in verse 6. The daughter of the king of the south go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority. Neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, him who begot her, and him who strengthened her. Long story short, let me read this to you, because the notes are a lot easier to read than me just babbling. So this whole section of verse 6, it's very confusing if you just are reading the words. It's like, what in the world are they talking about? But when you look at the history, it was fulfilled in the marriage between Antiochus, however you pronounce that, the second, the king of the north, and Bernice, the daughter of Ptolemy II. There was peace for a time because of this marriage, but it was upset when the king of the south died. He didn't make it. You see that in verse 6. So he shall not retain the power of her authority. So once Ptolemy died, meaning Bernice's daddy, once he died, Antiochus II put Bernice away and remarried his first wife. So she didn't retain her authority. There was peace for a time. King of the south dies. His daughter, who was temporary queen of the north, gets booted. It's like a soap opera. It's crazy. And the first wife comes back on the scene. And she's actually quite powerful. But she's ticked. So neither he nor his authority shall stand. But by this point, Laodice did not trust Antiochus II because divorce me, marry me, what are you doing? And he had him poisoned. So now we're up to Antiochus II. His wife, second time around for her, she didn't trust him. She had him poisoned. She also had all of the maids that came with Bernice killed, along with the son that Bernice bore to Antiochus II. Is anybody else's head spinning? The detail of that one verse is this entire soap opera of things going on between a daughter of a king being given to a king, divorcing his wife, remarrying her, then she poisons him. It's crazy. And after this whole reign of terror, Laodice, who was the daughter of the king of the north, she put her son Seleucus II on the throne, reigning in Syria. So she kind of served as a regent, but her son was actually the king. Phew! Now we're up to verse 7. A branch of her roots, that's the branch of Bernice's roots. Bernice's brother decides, you killed my sister. I'm now going to go and avenge my sister's death. So Bernice's brother, what's this dude's name? Another Ptolemy. Bernice's brother decides he is going to avenge his sister's death. So now he goes and attacks the king of the north. And this entire time, God's people are stuck in the middle. I want to back up a second and say something about Alexander the Great that I forgot. When Alexander came into Jerusalem while he was on his reign, again, we're backing up to when Alexander was still alive, his modus operandi was to basically gut the temples, rip everything out, and Hellenize everything, make everything Greek, because that was his goal, was to make the entire world Greek. However, when he came to Jerusalem, the high priests came out to meet him, and they honored him. And he was a little bit taken aback. They're dressed in their priestly garments of their white linen and their gold breastplates. And he was a little bit shocked. This is again in historical documents. And he's like, what's going on? And he said, we knew you were coming. They knew Alexander was coming because they had been reading the book of Daniel. And they knew a great king was coming from Greece. So when Alexander the Great, they showed him the prophecy of Daniel, rather than trashing the temple, he actually offered a sacrifice following the priest's directions to the temple, and he did not decimate the temple of Jerusalem. His successors did, but Alexander the Great didn't. I thought that was fascinating. And it was because the priests knew the prophecy, told him, we knew you were coming, and we baked a cake. And that was pretty cool. Okay, now we're jump back into the prophecy. So a branch of her roots, one shall arise in his place. That's the king of the south. Now Bernice's brother is coming up to avenge her. Bernice's brother did avenge her murder. And it says that he will continue, in verse 8, continue more years than the king of the north. He outlived, Ptolemy III outlived Seleucus II by 4 years. Check, check. Wow. Now we're up to verse 9. The king of the north in verse 9 is Seleucus II. The king of the south in verse 9 is Ptolemy III. When we get to verses 10 through 16, enter Antiochus III, or Antiochus the Great. And at that point, the king of the south was Ptolemy IV. And all of these characters are outlined and documented in great detail. Their conquests, their battles, how they fought, the things that they did, all map directly to these prophecies. And we're talking about now in verses 10 through 16. Return a muster greater than the former, come at the end years with great army, much equipment, all of that. It happened exactly like this prophecy said. In verse 14, now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fail. So the Jewish people, some of them decided, we're going to take matters into our own hands, and we're going to speed things up a little bit. So they decided that they were going to try to defeat the king of the south because they wanted to remain as part of the king of the north, apparently part of the Seleucid Empire. It was the more powerful at the time, but they failed. Now, up to verse 17. So this is still Antiochus the Great is the one in charge of Syria, the northern Seleucid Empire. So Antiochus the Great decided, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try to influence Egypt, and I'm going to give them my daughter. Here we go again, the whole let me give you one of my family to be one of your families so they can all be one big happy family. Never works out though, does it? So Antiochus the Great gave his daughter Cleopatra in marriage to Ptolemy V in 195 BC. Documented history. Verse 17, he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be for him. Unfortunately, when Cleopatra went to Egypt, rather than siding with her father, she chose to side with her husband. So that whole plan was foiled, foiled, foiled again. A ruler shall bring reproach against him to the end, and with the reproach removed, he shall turn his back on him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Turns out that when he came north, he was killed. So now the one in charge of the north, Seleucus IV, oddly enough, he was poisoned. So now there's no heir to the kingdom of the north. Enter the vile person, Antiochus IV. If you'll remember, we talked about the nasty things that Antiochus did when we studied in Daniel chapter 7. We'll repeat and review a few of those. So by the time we get to verse 21, now we have Antiochus IV, probably one of the most vile people in history. Why? Well, he continued with this whole battle of the north and south, and he tried to gain leverage, and he succeeded, and then he failed, and he succeeded, and he failed. But he was clever. He, unlike most kings, he took some of the spoils of war and he used them to bribe people to be his friend. People in his empire and people outside of his empire. He was very crafty, very smooth. He was a smooth talker. He was very strategic and clever. Anyways, so he wasn't like screaming and yelling like we saw King Neb. He was very strategic. He formed alliances with people, and he got people to be his friends by giving them some of the spoils of his wars. Ultimately, he gained success. So when Antiochus came to power after his brother, King Seleucus IV, was poisoned to death, with the force of a flood, they'll be swept away from before him and be broken, and also the Prince of the Covenant. So that's Israel, the Jewish nation at that point. I know they're not really a nation, but the Jews. After the league is made with him, verse 23, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and be strong with a small number of people. He didn't have a big army at this point. He shall enter peaceably, even into the richest places of the province. This is Antiochus IV again. He shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. This is what I was saying. He was very crafty, very sneaky. Yeah, stuck in the middle with you, exactly. Only for a time. Verse 25. This is still Antiochus IV. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south. And the king of the south at this point is Ptolemy. Another Ptolemy, Ptolemy IV. He shall stir up a battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand. For they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat a portion of his delicacies, in other words, the people that he thought he had bribed, shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both of these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, both the north and the south, bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table. Think peace talks. Nobody's really telling the truth. They're trying to talk each other out of things. They will speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. While returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, that's the Jewish people, so he shall do damage and return to his own land. Verse 29. At the appointed time he'll return and go toward the south, but it will not be like the former or the latter, for ships from Cyprus shall come against him. This crafty dude, the Egyptian area, the king of the south, he decides, The way to get back at the king of the north is to collude with those from Cyprus. Ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. Now, from a historical perspective, when this happened, when he went down to the south, when Antiochus IV went to the south thinking he's going to battle and win, and he did not know of these forces coming from Cyprus, not only did they not allow him to win, but they kind of beat him into submission. One of the historical references that I read said they had him stand, they drew a circle around him and said, "You step out of that circle and you are a dead man." He didn't step outside the circle. But from that point forward, now the Roman influence has started to come into play because Cyprus was being controlled by Rome. King of the South starts colluding with Rome. When they come in and Antiochus IV comes down to battle, he is met with ships and navies. The Roman navy just completely blasted him and humiliated him. So now he basically is going back home with his tail between his legs, humiliated. And now, even though he's still the king of the north, he's basically under the control of Rome. He doesn't have any choice in the matter. But when he starts coming through where the Jews are, those people, no, they didn't have the instant news like we have now. They thought he had died, and they were dancing in the streets. Woohoo! Antiochus IV is dead. Oh, he was mad. That is when he really went all out. He shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. He basically went in, he trashed the temple, take away the daily sacrifices. The Jews were no longer allowed to participate in their daily sacrifices, and the place there, the abomination of desolation. Now, in this context, it's history for us, it was future for Daniel. This is a precursor or a foreshadowing of what the end times Antichrist is going to do, but on a much greater scale. Antiochus was anti-Messiah. He was anti-Jew. He was anti-Semitic. He put up a statue of Zeus. He was Greek. So at the altar, he erected a statue of Zeus and made the Israel priests bow down to that statue. He slaughtered a pig on the altar in the Holy of Holies, defiling the temple, spewing pig's blood, and the Jews don't think kindly about pigs. They're an unclean animal to them. So the temple had been defiled. So in this context, that was the abomination of desolation that was the foreshadowing of the abomination and desolation that will happen in the end times during the tribulation when the Antichrist comes into power. Verse 32. Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. He tried to convince the Jewish people, just go along for the ride, just follow me and do what I tell you to do, and you won't get hurt. Listen to this. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. Have you ever heard of the Maccabean Wars? There were a small contingent of Jewish men who decided, we are not going to bow down to Zeus. We are not going to do what this evil person tells us to do. We're going to fight back. So they devised this guerrilla warfare of sorts, and they would come and attack Antiochus's men in small groups and then disappear. They knew where all the hidey holes were in their city. And as a result of that process, the Maccabeans actually prevailed. They cleaned up the temple, and in the process of cleaning up the temple, they needed to rededicate it to Jehovah God. And one of the things that they needed was to set up the candelabra, and that's supposed to be burning, but they only had enough oil for one day. So they had a decision to make. Are we going to light it and let it run out? We're going to light it. We got to light it. And it burned for 8 days. That is what the Jews, even today, celebrate as the Festival of Lights, or Hanukkah. And at that point, it was December 24th, 164 BC is when that rededication of the temple took place. We're only down to verse 36. Yikes. That's actually probably a pretty good place to break. We'll pick up verse 36 and go through the rest of chapter 12 next week, because now we're getting where a shift is about to occur. We've seen all of these prophecies fulfilled in history in great detail, and now things are going to shift to prophetic utterances that the angel gives to Daniel about things yet to come, even from where we sit. It's crazy. And I hope that this, if you want a copy of this spreadsheet that explains the time frames and the names of all these kings and who did what to whom and how they map to these verses, I'll make that available. It's based on my study and corroborating with a couple of other pastors. If you find errors in it, let me know. But that is what I have admired in for this past week, and it has been fascinating. And the end of all this is, you know what? God knows past, present, and future. His name is I am, not I was or I will be. It is I am. He lives outside of time in eternity, and he knows exactly what's going to happen. He told Daniel and Daniel's people how to prepare for what was coming, and some of them listened and some of them didn't. Back over to us for the same thing, right? He has told us what's coming. Some of us will listen and some of us will not. I pray that you are among those who listen. I'll close in prayer for tonight, and then I've got one, well, I'll save that for next week. I had a funny that I was going to include in here, but we ran out of time because of all this north and south stuff. But I hope that you are encouraged and that you are enlivened by the fact that these prophecies came true exactly as they were given to Daniel. Father God, thank you for this time that we've had together. Thank you for your word, that it is true, that you are faithful and true. Thank you for loving us enough to want to tell us what's going to happen. Thank you for being faithful and for being true to your word and letting all the things play out and orchestrating things to protect your Jewish nation and continue to do so even through the end times. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you that we have the ability to touch tons of information and data at the drop of a hat. Just give us the will and the willingness and the fortitude to do it, to go out and learn and to process these things so that we can understand what you are doing. Father God, I just ask that you would go with each and every one in this group tonight, whether they're watching live or on the replay or on YouTube later on. Just ask that you would give us peaceful rest with the knowledge that you are in control. And we thank you and bless the name of your Son, Yeshua, Jesus Christ the Messiah. For it's in his name I pray. Amen. I hope you all have a great week, and I hope you're encouraged. Go forth and do great things. Take care, and God bless.